Psychopathology may seem like an intimidating word on the front end, but whenever you break it down, it's a lot easier to understand. So, when you take the root psycho, of course, with psychology, you're referring to anything of the mind or behavior. Pathology, the study of disorders, so put them together. This is the study of psychological disorders, as mentioned, their symptoms, their causes, as well as their treatments. Now, when it comes to a psychological disorder, this is a condition characterized by abnormal thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So, these behaviors, thoughts, and inner experiences that are atypical, dysfunctional, or dangerous are signs of psychological disorders. However, there is no single definition of psychological abnormality or normality. And this is an important distinction to make here. Just because something is atypical does not mean that it is a disorder. So red hair is considered to be a minority hair color, but just because it's atypical does not mean that it is abnormal. That's an important distinction to make. Now, when it comes to the definition of a psychological disorder, the American Psychiatric Association, or the APA, defines a psychological disorder and it consists of the following. Firstly, there are significant disturbances in thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Next, the disturbances reflect some kind of biological, psychological, or developmental dysfunction. And thirdly, the disturbances lead to significant distress or disability in one's life, aka they have difficulty performing appropriate and expected roles. So again, to put this into a little bit of simpler context, whenever an individual is experiencing a psychological disorder, there has to be disturbances, of course, to their feelings, behavior, and the distress that they're experiencing is causing harm to their ability to operate socially, occupationally, and in other areas of functioning. Okay, next, when it comes to the DSM, and we'll talk about the DSM in chapter 16 as well, but we're now up to the 5th edition of this text. So DSM stands for, as mentioned, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and it was first published in 1952. So it's gone through a number of revisions. We're up to the 5th now, and it is used more specifically here in the United States. You'll see it commonly in doctoral programs, master programs, because the DSM is very descriptive. But that doesn't mean, of course, it can't be used in a clinical setting as well. Most students, though, whenever they go through a psychology or maybe even mental health specifically related to counseling program, they're going to spend a good bit of time looking into the DSM, hyper-focusing on specifically learning about the causes, treatments, as well as symptoms of mental disorders. Now, whenever you're going through the DSM, you'll notice that you find these common factors. In the last bullet point from the bottom, the categories, and it categorizes and describes each disorder. So it includes diagnostic features, aka an overview of the disorder, diagnostic criteria, so what are the symptoms required and how many symptoms need to be met for there to be a diagnosis, the prevalence of the disorder, so the percentage of the population that may be afflicted, as well as risk factors. Now, something that I'm going to commonly refer to in this chapter, as well as probably in chapter 16 as well, is the word comorbidity. If you're in my class learning about this particular area of the unit, make sure to highlight or to star comorbidity. This means that there's a co-occurrence of 2 or more disorders. Okay, so whenever an individual has, let's say, OCD, there's this much percentage chance that they may suffer from an anxiety-related or depressive-related disorder. Now, up at the very top, a diagnosis, this is important to define as well, is the appropriate identifying and labeling of a set of defined symptoms. Okay, so it requires classification systems that organize psychological disorders systematically. Okay, and as I just mentioned, comorbidity, again, the co-occurrence of 2 or more disorders. Commonly what is seen is that individuals who have obsessive compulsive disorder, there's a 41% chance that they also share in experiencing major depressive disorder. Okay, so there's a little bit of overlap with those two. Now, when it comes to the International Classification of Diseases, this is published by the World Health Organization, and the criteria and the classification for disorders are similar, but there are some differences that exist. So, firstly, the ICD includes diagnoses or disorders outside of just mental health, right? So the DSM is strictly focused on mental disorders, whereas the ICD is a little bit more, not just a little bit, a lot more in depth. And the ICD isn't really as descriptive, though, comparatively to the DSM. That's why I think that, of course, we like it here to have our own stuff here in the United States, but more specifically, whenever we use these textbooks in a classroom setting, it's very nice to have it in the sense that it describes these disorders really, really well. There's no question about or any discrepancies whenever you're reading through it. It just gives it right there to you, and that's why I like that DSM-5.